He lived in the $200 haunted cabin with only his dog. A midnight bark exposed a 50-year lie. They sold him the cabin for $200, a steal. They thought he was just a fool looking for solitude. They forgot about his dog. Bruno didn't care about the view. He cared about the smell coming from under the floorboards, a scent of decay that had been marinating for 50 years. The town didn't sell the man a home. They sold him a graveyard. And tonight, Bruno just dug up the first bone. The wind hit the cabin like a living thing, clawing at the logs, rattling the shutters, forcing its way through every cracked board. Snow moved sideways, white and furious, erasing the woods outside. Cole Harrington sat near the hearth, palms stretched toward a weak fire that kept losing the fight against the cold. His flannel shirt was still damp from the drive up the mountain, and the chill settled into his bones the way memories used to settle into his sleep. It was his first night in the $200 cabin. Locals had stared at him like he had bought a grave. Someone at the auction had muttered haunted under his breath. Cole ignored it. He had ignored worse things. Except tonight, the silence wasn't peace. It was a kind of hollow that made the air feel crowded. Bruno lay at his feet, the big German shepherd stretched out like a statue carved from muscle and instinct. 9 years old, but still carrying the stance of a deployed K-9. Ears sharp, shoulders taut, eyes that never slept all at once. Cole reached down and rubbed behind his ears. "We finally made it out here, buddy, just you and me." The dog didn't move. His gaze didn't even flicker toward Cole's hand. Then it came. A sound pulled from somewhere below the ribs, deep and resonant. Bruno growled. Not a bark, not a warning. This was the growl Cole had heard twice in his life. Once in Helmand, once in Kandahar. Both times a second before he died. Cole froze. His throat tightened the way it used to when sandstorms hid the enemy. Bruno rose in one clean motion, weight forward, tail straight, eyes locked on the base of the fireplace. Not the door, not the window, the fireplace. What the hell? Cole stood slowly. The cabin creaked under a gust of wind, but Bruno didn't react to the storm at all. His entire body stayed anchored to the same point on the stone floor, his breath tight, controlled. The same way he had warned about the pressure plate buried under a dusty patch of road 12 years ago. Cole's pulse kicked hard. Bruno never reacted like this without reason. He stepped closer to the hearth. The fire crackled in a thin, strained light. Shadows jumped against the stacked stones, uneven from decades of neglect. Nothing looked unusual. Nothing looked alive. But the dog didn't blink. Cole knelt beside him. "Talk to me, boy. What do you see?" Bruno gave a low, urgent huff. His eyes remained fixed on the bottom row of stones. Cole reached out and touched the rim of the hearth. Cold stone. Rough mortar, all normal. He pushed a little farther along the edge until his knuckle hit a flat slab. He tapped it with the back of a fingernail. A hollow thud. Not the solid echo of stone. Something beneath it. Cole's breath caught. This cabin was supposed to be empty, abandoned, but hollow floors did not happen by accident. Not out here. Not in a place with a missing person case attached to its name. He stood and crossed the room, grabbing the crowbar he had tossed beside his sleeping bag. Bruno followed, close enough that Cole could feel the dog's breath at his leg. He returned to the hearth and slid the crowbar toward the seam where stone met mortar. The metal scraped, slipping, finding no purchase. He tried again. The bar finally caught. Cole pushed with the force of a man trained to break down doors. A crack sliced through the room. Not the crumble of old cement. A seal breaking. Bruno jerked forward, ears snapping upright. The dog's growl sharpened into a warning, deep and focused. Cole leaned in, prying harder. The slab gave half an inch, then another. The air shifted. The temperature dropped. It felt like opening a window into a place that shouldn't exist. Outside, the storm wailed harder, like the mountain felt what he had just uncovered. Cole set the crowbar aside, dug his fingers beneath the stone, and pulled until it lifted free. He had expected dirt, maybe a crawl space, maybe rodents. Not this. A cut stone chamber, man-made and small. The kind carved by hands that didn't want it found. The beam of Cole's flashlight revealed an old metal lockbox, olive drab and military grade. Next to it, 3 leather-bound notebooks tied with a brittle cord that dissolved when the light touched it. Bruno stepped closer, nose lowered, body tense but steady. Not afraid. Guarding. Cole swallowed. This wasn't haunting. This was hiding. He reached into the chamber and pulled out the lockbox. The weight was wrong. Too heavy for keepsakes, too dense for tools. Something inside thudded softly against the metal, like glass. Samples? Evidence? He didn't open it. Not yet. The storm roared, the fire dimmed, and Bruno's attention stayed locked on the hole in the floor, as if expecting something to crawl back out. Cole looked around the cabin, listening to the faint whistle of wind through the doorframe. He had lived long enough with ghosts in his head to know the difference. This cabin wasn't cursed, it was compromised. He knelt beside Bruno and whispered, "You were right, boy. There's something here, something someone wanted buried." The dog didn't look away. He lay down slowly, eyes never leaving the open chamber beneath the hearth. Cole sat beside him, firelight flickering across their faces, the storm screaming outside, and the truth sitting between them like a sleeping threat. Bruno didn't bark again. He didn't need to. The message was already delivered. The cabin wasn't haunted. It was holding its breath. Cole woke with the feeling that someone had spent the entire night standing over him. The fire had burned down to a soft red glow, but the cold had crept back in, filling the cabin like fog. He pushed himself upright inside the sleeping bag, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Bruno was still awake, not resting, not dozing, standing. The dog's silhouette was rigid beside the hearth, head lowered, ears locked forward, his gaze fixed on the slab Cole had pulled up the night before. He hadn't moved all night. Cole could see it in the stiff line of his spine, the tight coil in his shoulders. "You gotta rest sometime, buddy," Cole whispered. Bruno didn't shift his weight. He didn't even blink. Cole felt a knot pulled tight inside his chest. He'd seen this before overseas. A K-9 refusing to sleep meant one thing. Whatever danger they had uncovered wasn't gone. It was waiting. He threw on his jacket and stepped outside to clear his head. The storm had settled into a quiet kneel of snow that blanketed the world in white. Pines bowed under the weight, and distant ridges blurred beneath the low grey sky. For a moment, Cole stood still, breathing the sharp mountain air until the burn in his lungs became steady. When he walked into town later that morning for supplies, the feeling didn't leave him. Heads turned in the general store. A woman near the counter hesitated before speaking in a low voice. "You bought the old Whitlow cabin?" Cole nodded. She paused, eyes filled with something he couldn't read. "That place swallowed a man whole 50 years ago. No body, no goodbye, just gone." Another man nearby muttered, "Some things stay buried for a reason." Cole left without responding. Rural towns had their superstitions, their local ghosts, their silences. But something in their tone felt off. Not fear, not folklore. Something closer to warning. When he returned to the cabin, Bruno was right where Cole left him, sitting guard over the stone floor. Cole placed the groceries down and knelt beside him. "Whatever this is, you're not letting it go, are you?" Bruno finally looked at him, not with reassurance but urgency. A message, not a question. Cole closed the hearth slab again, but the dog's eyes tracked it like he could still see straight through the stone. The day passed slow. Cole tried patching a draft under the door, cleaning up the debris in the corner, setting up his cot properly. But every time he turned, Bruno was there, returning to the fireplace, nose low, body tight. By late afternoon, the unease had grown into something sharper. The air felt too heavy, the walls too still, the kind of stillness that comes right before movement. At dusk it started, a faint noise, deep under the stone. Not an animal, not settling wood. A soft scrape, like something shifting against rock. Bruno's head snapped toward the sound. His body stiffened. The fur down his back rose. Cole heard it again. A crack of pressure, small but intentional, like someone tapping from beneath. Bruno moved before Cole could. The dog threw his weight against the hearth, paws striking the floor with a force that echoed through the cabin. He clawed deliberately at the second slab in the row, nails biting into the mortar with surgical precision. "Bruno, what is it?" Cole crouched, reaching for the dog's flank. Bruno didn't break focus. He scratched again, this time harder, the sound sharp and steady. He wasn't frantic. He was working. Cole leaned down, brushing away dust. Under the dog's paws, a thin grey line appeared. Mortar, but not old. Not natural. It was darker, smoother, too clean compared to the original stonework. Someone sealed this. Cole grabbed the crowbar again. He wedged it into the seam, while Bruno backed up just enough to give him room, but stayed close, ready. The pressure required was more than last night. This slab had been reinforced. It resisted, groaned, then finally cracked, giving off a smell like cold earth trapped for decades. As the stone loosened, a blast of air rose from the space below. Not warm, not cold, but stale. Stale in a way that made Cole's skin tighten. Like the breath of a room that had been closed off far too long. The moment the slab dropped aside, Bruno lunged forward, nose to the hole, sniffing deep, then growling with a sound so low it vibrated the floorboards. Cole shined his flashlight inside. This chamber was smaller and older than the first. Flattened stones lined the walls, and at the very bottom, something metallic glimmered beneath dirt. A latch. Cole's pulse hammered. He reached in and brushed earth aside until a small iron box emerged, rusted around the edges, but intact. Someone didn't want this found. He lifted it out. It felt lighter than the first, but no less important. The lid resisted, stuck from decades of neglect. He pried gently until it snapped open. Inside were photographs wrapped in yellowed wax paper. Black and white shots of men in uniform near unmarked barrels, heavy trucks in the woods, and a single picture of a narrow creek with a dead deer collapsed beside it. Cole's breath went thin. These weren't keepsakes. These were evidence. Bruno gave a sharp grunt, not a bark, but a demand. Cole followed his gaze. The wooden floor near the window had shifted. Just slightly, as if weight had pressed down. Cole's body locked. Someone had been outside. Maybe still was. Bruno moved before he did, stepping in front of Cole with a silent authority trained over years. His shoulders squared, ears pricked, tail straight. The cabin was no longer quiet. Not peaceful, not isolated. It was being watched. Cole reached slowly for his rifle. Bruno didn't break posture. His instincts had awakened, and Cole knew better than to question a K9 that had saved his life, more times than he could count. Whatever had been buried under this cabin wasn't just history. It was alive in the present. And someone knew Cole had found the first crack in a 50-year lie. The third stone took longer to lift than the others. It was heavier, packed tight with old mortar, as if someone had sealed it in a hurry. Cole planted his boots firmly, slid the crowbar into the faint seam Bruno had uncovered, and pushed with all the force stored in his shoulders. The stone finally gave way with a brittle crack. A gust of air rose from below, stale and cold, like the breath of something that had been locked underground for decades. Bruno stepped forward immediately, body tense, nose dipping toward the dark opening. He didn't growl this time. He didn't bark. He simply stared down into the black, unmoving, like a soldier standing guard over a dormant threat. Cole aimed his flashlight into the hollow. A shallow chamber, barely 3 feet deep, carved neatly into the earth. Smooth stone walls, dry soil, no rodents, no moisture, nothing disturbed, nothing touched since the day it had been sealed. Waiting. Inside lay 3 things: an old olive-drab lockbox, military issue, the corners rusted but still intact. A stack of 3 leather notebooks tied loosely with a band that snapped the moment the light hit it. A folded cloth patch, brittle with age, embroidered with a faded emblem. A newspaper logo. Cole didn't recognize it at first. The light flickered across the notebooks. Jonas Whitlow. The name was stamped on the inside cover in careful, square handwriting. Cole's pulse kicked hard. He knew that name. He'd heard it the day he picked up the deed. Someone in town had whispered it beneath their breath. A reporter. Missing. Never found. Nearly 50 years gone. He picked up the first notebook. The leather cracked along the spine, the pages stiff with age. Bruno stayed glued to his side, chin high, watching the open chamber like something inside might still shift. Cole sat down against the log wall, set the flashlight on the table, and opened the first journal. It wasn't what he expected. Jonas Whitlow didn't write like a man chasing a ghost story or a local legend. His script was precise, measured, deliberate, as if he knew every word might someday have to defend itself. The first pages were simple observations, weather patterns, migrations, wells gone dry for no clear reason, a handful of locals reporting bitter-tasting water in the winter months, cattle deaths dismissed as disease. Then the tone changed. It shifted from documentation to confession, from curiosity to fear. Cole read aloud softly, eyes narrowing. The deer were the first. 3 of them. Found foaming near the creek bed. I tested the water myself. Metallic taste. High sediment. Something else I can't identify. Cole paused. Metallic water. Sick animals. Dead livestock. Patterns he'd seen overseas in villages that lived downstream from forgotten burn pits and chemical disposal sites. He flipped to the next page. A map. A hand-drawn grid of the valley surrounding the cabin. Red circles dotted the page, each marked with dates and sample notes. Each won a different point in the watershed. Bruno suddenly shifted his weight and pressed his body firmly against Cole's leg. Not out of fear, but grounding. A silent signal. Partner awareness. They had shared enough fire and nights in hostile terrain that the gesture pulled Cole straight back into combat mode. It wasn't the journal that bothered Bruno. It was the cabin. Cole looked up. The air inside the room felt heavier now, the quiet too sharp, like a knife pressed against glass. He returned to the notebook. Jonas wrote about encountering men in the woods. Unmarked trucks, late-night activity near the creek. Strange barrels half buried under snow. The sheriff at the time telling him to drop the story. Neighbors warning him to leave town. The entries became frantic toward the end. There is something in the water. Northwood Extractives has been dumping for years. Cancer cases hidden. Land seizures disguised as eminent domain. No one will talk. Fear is stronger than truth here. Cole exhaled slowly. He flipped again. Last entry. Only 4 words, scribbled in a hurried scrawl. If I disappear, investigate the cabin. Cole closed the book with a soft thud. He stared at the chamber beneath the hearth, then at the box he hadn't opened yet. Bruno sat beside him, posture tall, guarding the opening like something inside might still crawl out. Cole reached for the box. Its hinges groaned as he lifted the lid. Inside, carefully packed, were glass vials, some filled with murky water, others with soil, labels handwritten with sample dates from half a century ago. Northwood Creek, South Fork, Ridgewell Well, all with alarming chemical markers. Even after all these years, the evidence was still intact. Cole leaned back, breath shallow. This cabin was never haunted. It was a storage vault, a grave for the truth. Snow hammered against the window, rattling the frame. Bruno's ears snapped upward. He growled low, deep, instinctive. Cole stood fast. Someone was outside. The footsteps were faint but deliberate, moving slow around the right side of the cabin. Bruno moved ahead of Cole, positioning himself between the door and his handler, tail stiff, body anchored. Cole's mind raced. Someone had been watching. Someone knew this chamber existed. Someone knew the stone had been lifted. He grabbed the rifle from the wall, eyes on the window's shadow. Bruno didn't break his line of sight. Cole whispered, barely audible. "You were right, boy. Someone doesn't want this coming out." A soft crunch in the snow. A pause, then retreating footsteps, fast, disappearing into the trees. Cole waited another full minute before lowering his weapon. Bruno stayed locked in place, watching the door as if the intruder might return any second. Cole looked back at the journals and the evidence spread across the floor. 50 years of silence had just cracked open. And Bruno had sensed it before Cole ever touched the stone. Whatever they had uncovered, it wasn't finished. It was beginning. Morning broke without warmth. The storm had moved on, but it left the woods frozen stiff and the sky a pale, washed-out grey. Cole hadn't slept. He sat at the old wooden table with Jonas Whitlow's notebooks spread out around him, the lockbox of samples beside his elbow. Bruno lay close, not resting, but listening, every breath slow and measured. Cole flipped to the next set of pages. Jonas's handwriting tightened, the ink pressed harder into the paper. This wasn't curiosity anymore. It was survival. Northwood Extractives. The name showed up again and again, sometimes written plainly, sometimes shortened to NWX, sometimes replaced with a single line, as if Jonas hesitated to write it more than he had to. Cole turned another page and found a detailed map of the valley. Not a simple sketch, a professional survey map. Dozens of red dots marked the watershed, each one labeled with a date, water quality numbers, and a short code Cole couldn't decipher. Bruno lifted his head and nudged Cole's elbow gently. A grounding touch. The dog knew when Cole's breathing changed, when he started slipping into the kind of focus that narrowed the world too much. Cole scratched behind his ears once, steadying himself, then kept reading. Jonas wrote, "The first sample showed arsenic far beyond safe limits. The second sample contained traces of industrial solvents used by Northwood decades ago. This cannot be coincidence." Cole exhaled sharply. It matched everything he'd seen in towns overseas where contractors cut corners and dumped waste outside the wire. He moved to the next notebook. Entries from the winter of 1974. Jonas mentioned seeing trucks moving through the woods late at night. Heavy cargo. No headlights. Tires wrapped in cloth to muffle noise. He wrote about confronting a county inspector who told him to drop the story or leave Vermont altogether. Then the tone of the journal darkened. "Someone has been following me. I saw footprints outside the cabin this morning. Someone tried the door last night." Cole paused. Outside, the wind shifted just enough to tap a branch lightly against the window. Bruno's ears snapped forward. He didn't move yet, but the tension in his shoulders returned. Cole kept reading, more urgently now. "I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a torn piece of fabric and a typed note. Your curiosity is a danger to everyone here. Let it die." Cole sat back in his chair. His fingers tightened around the spine of the notebook. This wasn't folklore. This wasn't a ghost story whispered in grocery aisles. This was a cover-up. He lifted one of the glass vials from the box. Muddy brown water sloshed inside. The label read, "Northwood Creek, 1973. He set it down and opened the next one. Soil heavy with black residue. Bruno stood abruptly. Not startled, ready. Cole froze. The dog's head was angled towards the door, but his body rotated slowly, as if tracking something outside. His fur lifted. Along his spine, a dark ridge of warning. Cole whispered, "You hear something?" Bruno took one deliberate step towards the window. His breathing changed, tighter and lower, the sound he only made when a threat moved closer, not when it lingered far away. Cole reached for his rifle leaning against the chair. He didn't raise it. Not yet. He just held it loosely, the way he'd been trained, ready to bring it up in one clean motion. Then came the sound. A crunch of snow, faint but unmistakable, just beyond the porch steps. Someone was approaching. Slow, careful, like they knew where the floorboards creaked. Bruno shifted again, moving ahead of Cole, ears locked forward. His tail held straight, not wagging, not tucked, but balanced the way it was during active operations. Cole stepped silently to the window and lifted the cloth curtain half an inch. Nothing but trees, heavy snow piled against trunks, no movement. Another sound, this time to the right side of the cabin. Not footsteps, something dragging lightly along wood. Cole's pulse climbed. Bruno growled, a quiet, vibrating sound that seemed to come from the floor itself. He moved to the corner near the fireplace, the same place where Jonas had written that someone once tried to pry open a window. Cole leaned close enough to whisper, "Talk to me, boy." Bruno didn't look back, his whole frame angled toward the wall. He pressed his nose to the narrow gap in the boards, breathing in sharply. Cole's stomach tightened. Dogs didn't just smell humans, they smelled fear, sweat, chemicals, intent. Bruno growled again. The footsteps retreated suddenly, fast, crunching down the path in long strides. Whoever had approached wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. Cole moved quickly to the front door, cracked it open, and scanned the clearing with his rifle ready. Nothing but fresh snow. But then he saw them. Tracks. 2 distinct sets of prints leading directly to the cabin's right wall and then away into the tree line. They were fresh, no more than 30 seconds old. Someone had been standing inches from the wall while Cole read the evidence. Cole shut the door and bolted it. He moved back to the table and flipped through the journal pages again, searching for something he might have missed. Halfway through the second notebook, he found it. A line written in darker ink, the script jagged from fear or urgency. "If I disappear, it will not be an accident. Look to Northwood, and trust your dog more than the sheriff." Cole read it twice. Sheriff. Bruno let out a single sharp bark, a command bark, the kind he used in combat zones when he wanted Cole alert now. Cole grabbed the notebooks and the box, pushed them into his pack, and slung it onto his shoulder. Someone didn't just know he was reading Jonas Whitlow's work. They were trying to stop him, and by the sound of those retreating footsteps, they would be back. Bruno stood beside him, ready. The past wasn't just resurfacing. It was walking straight toward them. The knock came just after noon. 3 steady raps, firm and practiced. Not the kind a neighbor used. The kind a man in uniform used when he expected to be obeyed. Bruno was on his feet before Cole even reached the door. His entire body went rigid, a silent tremor running through his muscles as he positioned himself between Cole and the entrance. His growl rose from deep in his chest, low and controlled, the exact sound he made before lunging at a hostile target overseas. Cole cracked the door open half an inch. A man stood on the porch, snow clinging to his boots and brimmed hat. Sheriff Eli Dawes. Stocky, late 50s, clean uniform, badge polished brighter than the sun. His smile was thin, shaped more by calculation than kindness. "Afternoon, Mr. Harrington," he said. Cole nodded, pulling the door slightly closer against his leg so Bruno wouldn't charge. "Everything all right?" Cole asked. Dawes tilted his head as though he were studying a strange animal. "Storm passed. Figured I'd come check on our newest resident. Folks said you bought the Whitlow place. Not many people would make that choice." Bruno stepped forward, bumping the door with his shoulder, teeth bared. This wasn't fear. It was recognition. Instinct. Cole tightened his grip on the door frame. He'd never seen Bruno react like this to a civilian. "He's protective," Cole said. "Protective is good," Dawes replied, but his eyes stayed locked on Bruno, especially in a place with history. Cole didn't take the bait. "What kind of history?" Dawes shrugged lightly. "Oh, legends, stories. The kind old-timers tell to keep kids out of trouble. But you know how people talk. Places like this hold memories." His tone shifted just slightly. Sometimes they hold more than that. Bruno snarled, the kind of sound that made men freeze on the battlefield. Dawes watched the dog carefully, then looked back at Cole. "Mind if I step in?" "Cabin's small," Cole said, keeping his voice neutral. "We can talk from here." Dawes nodded like he expected that answer. His smile didn't move. "All right then, I'll just keep it simple." He leaned in a fraction. "Find anything unusual in there yet?" Cole's pulse kicked. He kept his face steady. "Unusual how? False floors, hidden panels, old belongings, reporter stuff? You know, things that aren't on the deed?" Cole didn't respond. He felt Bruno shift, pressing against his leg, urging tension upward in warning. Dawes narrowed his eyes. "If you do find anything, just remember this. The past is dangerous when people keep digging. It has a way of fighting back." Cole met his gaze. "I'm not here to dig into anyone's business." "Good," Dawes said softly. "It's best to leave certain stories buried." He took one step back, tipping his hat. "Stay safe up here. Winter can get mean." He walked down the porch steps with slow, deliberate steps, boots crunching through the snow. Cole didn't move until the sheriff's truck disappeared behind the pines. Only then did he shut the door and latch it. Bruno remained at the threshold, tail stiff, ears pinned forward. The dog's breathing came sharp through his nose, the sound of pure instinct locked onto a threat. "You didn't like him at all, did you?" Cole murmured. Bruno gave a sharp grunt, as if to confirm. Cole checked the windows one by one. He found something he hadn't noticed earlier. A small puncture in the snow outside the east window, too clean, too precise to be animal tracks. A boot had been there. Recently. He felt cold crawl through his spine. Dawes wasn't just checking in. Someone had already been watching the cabin before the sheriff knocked. Night fell quickly. The sky turned dark blue, the kind of color that swallowed light whole. Cole sat with the notebook spread open again, reading Whitlow's warning. "If I disappear, it will not be an accident." Bruno lay near the back door now, ears twitching, eyes tracking every shift of wind outside. Cole trusted Bruno's instincts more than any man's. If the dog said danger was coming, then danger was already here. Just after midnight, the sound came. A faint scritch against the rear door frame. Not wind, not tree limbs. A deliberate scrape of gloved fingers feeling for weakness. Bruno exploded into motion. His growl deepened, turning into a bark so violent it shook dust from the rafters. He launched himself at the back door, claws raking wood as he braced to strike. Cole grabbed his rifle, heart pounding. The door handle twitched. Someone was trying to force it. Bruno didn't wait. With a full-body lunge, he hit the door hard enough that the hinges screamed. A startled shout rose outside. The intruder scrambled, slipping on ice, stumbling away from the porch. Cole kicked the door open and aimed into the dark. A shadow fled between the trees, fast and clumsy. Not trained. Not expecting a 90-pound German shepherd to come barreling through the threshold. Bruno snarled and surged forward, snow spraying under his paws as he chased the figure to the edge of the clearing. Cole whistled sharply. Bruno skidded to a halt, standing guard at the tree line, chest heaving, eyes burning into the dark where the intruder vanished. Cole caught up, breath sharp in the freezing air. Tracks in the snow led into the woods, deep and hurried. Someone knew exactly what Cole had found in that cabin. Someone wanted it back. And Sheriff Dawes had shown up just in time to send a warning. Bruno stayed beside Cole, posture tall, breath steaming into the night. Whatever had been buried for 50 years wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was hunting them. Cole waited until the last bar of signal flickered back onto the cheap satellite phone. Snow pressed heavy against the windows, wind grinding against the cabin walls as if trying to push its way inside. On the table lay the photocopied maps, soil reports, and Jonas Whitlow's journals. A half-century-old investigation reborn in a single night. He opened the message thread labeled Mason Clark. Mason was the only person Cole trusted with this. Former investigative journalist, now freelancing on exposés that made federal agencies sweat. They had served together in Fallujah. Mason owed his life to Cole. Cole owed the truth to Mason now. Cole attached the files, pressed send, and waited. Bruno paced in tight circles, tail low, steps nervous, nails clicking against the wood. It wasn't anxiety. Cole knew this rhythm. Bruno was listening, calculating. The phone blinked. Uploading. Bruno froze, not at the door, not at the window, at the roof. He lifted his head, nostrils flaring, muscles stiffening in one ripple from nose to tail. A warning surged through his entire body before Cole heard anything. Then came the sound. A distant shatter. Cole spun toward the window. A bottle arced through the night, its flame trailing like a comet. It smashed against the front wall. Fire exploded outward, sucking air into a roaring bloom of heat. Bruno lunged at Cole, teeth gripping his sleeve, yanking him back from the blast just as the window burst inward. Flames licked across the ceiling in seconds, climbing dry beams like they'd been waiting. Cole shielded his face from the heat, already choking on smoke. His chest tightened, vision blurring. Bruno barked once, sharp and commanding. "Move!" Cole grabbed the satchel of evidence and slung it across his chest. Sparks rained down. The fire was no accident. This was an execution. He ran for the back door. Bruno stayed at his flank, herding him, bumping him away from collapsing beams, guiding him with the instincts of a dog who'd dragged wounded soldiers through worse. Another bottle flew through the rear window. Fire surged toward them. Heat punched Cole in the face. The cabin walls crackled, moaned, then roared as the flames fused into one consuming wave. Bruno slammed his shoulder into Cole's leg, forcing him toward the exit. Cole kicked the door open, snow and cold air blasting in to meet them. They stumbled into the night, coughing, the fire roaring behind them like a monster finally unchained. Two figures stood at the tree line, silhouettes holding another pair of flaming bottles. Cole raised his pistol. He fired once. The nearest man dropped to his knees and collapsed into the snow. The second fled into the woods, disappearing into the dark. Bruno didn't chase. He circled Cole, keeping his flank close, breath steaming as he scanned for threats. But then Cole saw it. A dark smear along Bruno's side. His left flank was burned, skin raw beneath curled fur. Cole dropped to his knee, hands trembling as he touched the wound. Bruno winced but made no sound. Not a whimper, not a shake, just steady, determined breath. "You saved my life," Cole whispered. Bruno nudged his chest with his nose, urging him to keep moving. Behind them, the cabin collapsed inward, the roof dropping with a deafening crack. Flames shot high into the sky, lighting the snow in a pulsing orange glow. Everything inside was gone. The journals left in the open, the maps on the table, the boxes, the documents, the original evidence, burned. But the digitized files had already been sent to Mason. The truth was out. Cole pulled Bruno close, then led him into the forest. Snow crunched under their boots and paws. Branches snapped behind them. Far off, an engine roared to life. Someone was still searching. They kept moving. Cole's breath came fast and white. He felt every shadow as though hands reached from the dark. The woods swallowed them, the world shrinking into cold air and instinct. Bruno sniffed the wind, choosing paths with precision. He avoided open ground. He skirted around tracks. He paused at ridgelines to listen for engines, footsteps, voices. This wasn't just fear. It was training. Memory. A soldier's second nature finding life again in a dog who never forgot the battlefield. As they reached a thicket near the frozen creek, Cole finally stopped. He leaned against a fallen tree, chest burning from smoke, lungs raw. Bruno sat beside him, flank rising and falling with labored breath. Cole pulled his jacket off and wrapped it around the dog's side to keep the cold from hitting the burn. The wind howled above them, stirring branches like skeletal fingers. Cole looked back toward the glow of the burning cabin, his home, his refuge, the only safe place he thought he had left. It was gone, a memory drowned in fire. But the truth wasn't, and as Cole listened to the approaching engines in the distance, a bitter clarity settled over him. Northwood extractives hadn't just silenced Whitlow. They had hunted him for 50 years, and now they were hunting Cole. He looked at Bruno. The dog lifted his head, locking eyes with him. There was no fear in those eyes, only resolve, a promise. "We see this through." Cole placed his hand on Bruno's neck. They wanted Whitlow's story buried, but thanks to one midnight bark, it had clawed its way back to the surface. And now, in the frozen dark, with the smell of smoke still clinging to their clothes, Cole felt the truth settle like iron. They were coming, but so were he and Bruno, together. The first sound Cole heard that morning was not wind or breaking branches. It was a low, thumping rhythm rolling across the valley. At first he thought it was his heartbeat still pounding from the escape, but Bruno was already up, ears high, body angled toward the sky. Rotor blades. Cole pushed himself upright, wincing at the ache in his ribs. Frost clung to his jacket. Smoke still lingered on his clothes. Bruno stayed pressed against his leg, his burned side wrapped in Cole's jacket. The thumping grew louder, echoing off the frozen creek bed until snow shook loose from branches. Helicopters. Not one. 3. Cole reached for his sidearm, but then his satellite phone buzzed in his pocket. Weak signal. One unread message, from Mason Clark. "Hold on, help incoming. FBI and EPA both mobilized. The files blew everything open." Cole exhaled, a slow breath that felt like he'd been holding it for years. Snow blasted around them as the first helicopter descended towards the clearing, downdraft whipping the air into a frenzy. Bruno leaned into Cole, but didn't back away. He watched the aircraft with the unwavering composure of a trained K9, assessing, not panicking. The chopper touched down. Doors slid open. Agents in dark, windproof gear rushed out, scanning the tree line with rifles raised. One agent spotted them. "Found them. Over here." Cole raised his hands to show he wasn't armed. Bruno stood tall beside him, wary but steady. A woman with a federal badge on her chest jogged toward them. She was mid-40s, frost on her collar, eyes sharp and tired at the same time. "Sergeant Cole Harrington." "Yes, you're safe now. We have you." She knelt carefully in front of Bruno, giving him space. "That your partner?" Cole nodded. "He saved both of us last night." The agent's gaze softened. "Then we owe him too." Bruno sniffed her glove, then nudged her wrist once. Permission granted. 2 medics rushed forward, gently checking Bruno's flank. "Burn wounds, 2nd degree. Lucky." But the dog stood firm, refusing to lie down until Cole gave a quiet command. When the helicopter lifted them towards the sky, Cole looked down at the valley shrinking beneath him. The cabin site was a black scar of ash in the snow, still smoking faintly. Everything he owned there was gone, but something else rose from the wreckage instead. Truth. At the FBI field office 2 towns over, Mason Clark burst through the hallway the second Cole stepped in. He looked older than Cole remembered. Lines around his eyes, grey in his beard. But the moment he saw Cole, he grabbed him in a rough, relieved hug. "Jesus, Harrington, you look like you crawled out of a war zone." "Feels pretty accurate," Cole muttered. Then Mason knelt beside Bruno. "You did it again, buddy," he whispered. "Saved him just like Fallujah." Bruno leaned forward and rested his forehead against Mason's shoulder, the moment held steady, full of everything words never captured. Mason straightened. "The files you sent were a nuclear bomb. EPA's already on their knees reviewing everything. You didn't just uncover Whitlow's work. You finished it." An EPA investigator entered the room with a folder. Her expression told Cole everything before she spoke. "The samples and maps are authentic. Northwood's disposal sites match every documented cancer cluster in the region. We're talking toxic dumping across multiple watersheds." Cole felt something cold twist inside him. "And the missing reporter? Jonas Whitlow?" The investigator nodded. "We can confirm he was targeted. His disappearance wasn't random." Before she finished, the FBI agent from the forest entered with a radio in hand. "We got Dawes." Cole turned sharply. "Sheriff Dawes." The agent nodded. "Tried to flee his ranch at dawn. State troopers boxed him in. He had burner phones, duplicate passports, and 2 locked crates full of Northwood payout records." Cole swallowed. He remembered Dawes' smile at the porch door, the warning disguised as hospitality. "Any resistance?" "He ran," she said. "But he didn't get far." Mason stepped closer. "Dawes worked for Northwood. For years. He was the one who buried Whitlow's disappearance. The one who kept the town quiet. He did the same to you." Cole looked down at Bruno, who rested at his feet, eyes following each voice calmly, like he'd always known the truth. The agent continued. "We also found surveillance equipment in a shed behind his house. He'd been monitoring the cabin since before you bought it." Cold moved through Cole's chest. "So the place was never haunted. It was a crime scene. A trap." Mason nodded. "And you walked straight into it." "With Bruno," Cole said quietly. "That made all the difference." Bruno thumped his tail against the floor, slow and confident. The federal agents briefed Cole through the morning. Northwood Extractives was officially under full-scale investigation. Arrest warrants were being prepared for senior executives. EPA disaster teams were already in the valley collecting groundwater evidence. News crews were gathering outside. The truth Whitlow died for was finally seeing daylight. Hours later, when they finally let him rest, Cole found a quiet room with a cot. He lay down, exhaustion washing through him like a tide. Bruno padded over, circled once, and lay beside the cot with his head on Cole's forearm. Cole stared at the ceiling. "We did it, buddy." Bruno didn't move, but his steady breathing answered for him. The storm had broken, and justice, 50 years late, had finally found its way home. 1 year later, the forest looked different. Not healed, Not cleansed, just quieter, like a wounded giant finally allowed to rest. The federal barricade still ringed the northern valley, bright yellow signs warning of contamination buried in the soil. Whole teams in hazmat suits came and went, moving through the trees like ghosts in white armor. The land wasn't forgotten anymore. It was under watch, under care, under truth. Cole Harrington stood on the porch of the new cabin and watched snow drift across the clearing. The cabin wasn't fancy. He built it himself over the summer, plank by plank, using lumber donated by townspeople who once avoided the hillside entirely. The wood smelled new, sharp, honest. Beside him, Bruno stretched lazily, one leg kicking out as he rolled onto his side. The burn scar along his flank had grown over with short, coarse fur. It wasn't pretty, not in the traditional sense. But Cole saw it the way soldiers saw their own scars. Proof, a map of survival, a story told in skin. "You look good, buddy," Cole murmured. Bruno huffed in response, tail sweeping the porch once, a gentle, satisfied sweep. The mornings were easier now, not quiet in the haunted way of that first winter, but quiet in a way Cole had never thought he would want. He brewed coffee without checking every window. He let Bruno roam in the yard without worrying if someone watched from the trees. The nightmares still came, but fewer than before. And when they did, Bruno woke him the same way he had in the desert years ago. One heavy paw on Cole's chest, steady and grounding. Cole went back to therapy, this time with intention instead of obligation. The VA counselor, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Morrison, didn't ask about firefights or explosions first. She asked about isolation, trust, the feeling of being hunted even when he wasn't. Cole told her about the cabin fire, about the sheriff, about Jonas Whitlow's journals. He talked until the words stopped tasting like smoke. One session, Dr. Morrison leaned back and said, "Cole, you didn't stay alive because you ran from danger. You stayed alive because you refused to look away from truth." Cole glanced at Bruno. He didn't do it alone. The town had changed too, slowly, clumsily, but genuinely. At the general store, someone hung a framed photo of Jonas Whitlow near the counter. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "For the man who tried to warn us." People left flowers sometimes, notes, an apology disguised as remembrance. And on the first warm day of spring, a group of high school students planted a memorial tree near the courthouse. Cole stood at the back of the crowd with Bruno at his side. No speeches, no ceremony, just kids pushing their hands into damp soil to honor a man their grandparents had once been too scared to mention. After the planting, a gray-haired man approached Cole. He looked familiar, though Cole couldn't place him. His jacket smelled like wood varnish and wintergreen tobacco. "You Harrington?" the man asked. Cole nodded. The man's eyes softened. "My father knew Whitlow. Tried to warn him to leave before doors got too close. I didn't come forward back then. Cowardice, I guess." Cole waited. The man swallowed. "Thank you for finishing what he started." Cole didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded again. Sometimes silence was the only honest reply. As the months passed, the Northwood investigation grew into a storm that swept across the state. Executives resigned under pressure. Some were indicted. Families learned the truth about illnesses they had buried under coincidence. The valley's groundwater was pumped, filtered, retested. Progress was slow, but visible. The town, broken open at last, stitched itself back together. By late autumn, Cole settled into a rhythm. Rebuild, hike, rest, repeat. Night after night, he and Bruno sat on the porch with mugs and water bowls, watching the sun disappear behind the skeletal pines. Bruno loved the porch. He claimed the same spot every evening, front paws touching the first stair, ears tuned to the whisper of the forest. Not guarding out of fear anymore, guarding out of habit. out of pride, out of identity. One evening, as wind pushed thin snow across the clearing, Bruno suddenly lifted his head and stared towards the ridge. Not tense, not alarmed, just listening. Cole paused, hand hovering over his coffee mug. "What is it?" he asked softly. Bruno didn't move for several seconds. Then, with a slow exhale, he lowered his head back to the porch boards. Cole smiled. If Bruno said all was fine, it was. Inside the new cabin, on the rebuilt mantel, sat a single weathered object. The least damaged of Jonas Whitlow's notebooks, protected now inside a glass frame. Cole didn't read it often, but he kept it close. A reminder that truth had weight, and silence had consequences. Some nights Cole reread certain lines by lamplight. If I disappear, that means I found something real, and someone real needs to finish this. Cole always felt a quiet chill at that part. Not fear, purpose. 1 year ago he had walked into that valley looking for solitude. Instead, he found a buried story, a dead man's warning, a sheriff's lie, a company's poison, and a dog's unshakable instinct. Tonight he found something else. Simplicity. Not peace. Not yet, but enough. Bruno shifted closer, pressing his warm body against Cole's leg. The scar on his flank glowed faintly in the porch light. "You're the reason I'm still here," Cole whispered. Bruno thumped his tail twice, steady and sure. A year after the cabin burned, after the valley's truth rose from its hiding place, Cole had finally found a stillness that didn't suffocate. It didn't erase the fire, or the fear, or the 50-year lie that tried to swallow them whole. It simply made room. Room for healing. Room for truth. Room for a man and his dog to breathe again. The fluorescent lights in the Maple Ridge Middle School gym hummed softly, filling the wide space with a faint electric pulse. Folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows, the kind that creaked loudly if you shifted in them. Posters about honesty, courage, and environmental safety lined the walls. A projector screen sat pulled down behind the podium. Cole Harrington stood just off stage, adjusting the collar of the clean flannel he wore for the occasion. He wasn't used to public speaking. He had turned down every interview, podcast request, and documentary pitch that came his way. But when the school principal wrote to him about speaking to the 8th graders for Truth and Service Week, something in him said yes. Maybe because teaching kids the truth felt more important than telling adults what they already pretended to know. Beside him, Bruno sat tall and alert. His coat had grown back thick around the burn scar, leaving only a faint line of darker fur along his side. The kids would see it. Cole didn't mind. Bruno didn't either. When the principal stepped up to the mic and said his name, the room erupted in applause louder than he expected. But it wasn't for him. It shifted the moment Bruno walked out beside him. Every kid straightened. Some gasped softly. One whispered, "That's the dog from the news!" Cole placed a hand on Bruno's back. The dog sat at the foot of the stage, surveying the crowd the way he might scan a village street overseas. Calm, observant, ready. "Thanks for having us," Cole began. His voice echoed against the gym rafters. "I don't usually give talks, but when your principal mentioned courage, well, I brought someone who knows more about it than I do." A ripple of laughter. Bruno's ears flicked forward. Cole leaned on the podium, breathing steadily. "A year ago, I moved into a $200 cabin because I thought isolation would quiet my head, thought I could outrun the things I didn't want to face." He glanced down at Bruno. Turns out he wouldn't let me ignore a damn thing. A few students giggled, surprised at the almost curse. The teachers didn't intervene. Cole continued. "Bruno isn't trained to bark at shadows. He doesn't react to superstition or old stories. He reacts to truth, to danger, to things that don't belong. He told the kids about Bruno's first growl at the fireplace, about the sealed stone, about the journals written by a reporter no one dared to defend 50 years ago, about the night the cabin went up in flames and the dog dragged him towards the snow. He didn't dramatize anything. The facts were dramatic on their own. When he finished, he paused. The silence was different now, heavy in a thoughtful way, not fearful. Bruno stood, stretched his front legs, then sat again with a deep, contented sigh. A hand slowly lifted in the third row. A girl with oversized glasses, her braids slightly crooked. "Sir, do you think the cabin was really haunted?" The question earned some snickers from the back, but the girl didn't flinch. She stared straight at him, genuinely curious. Cole smiled softly. "No, ghosts don't poison water." He waited a beat. Ghosts don't silence reporters. He let the words settle. Ghosts don't hide evidence for 50 years and then try to burn it down when someone gets close. The room went completely still. Another student raised a hand, a boy this time, fidgeting with his hoodie string. "But people said the cabin was cursed. My uncle swears he felt something weird there once." Cole nodded. People call things haunted when they don't want to look at the real reasons they're afraid. That valley wasn't cursed. It was contaminated, covered up, forgotten. He placed a hand on Bruno's shoulders, fingers sinking into warm fur. "My dog didn't bark at ghosts. He barked at a lie." One of the teachers blinked hard, trying not to cry. A student in the front row leaned forward. How did he know? I mean, how do dogs like him just know? Cole let out a long breath. That question, more than any, mattered. "Because he pays attention," Cole said. "More than we do. He doesn't talk himself out of instinct. He doesn't ignore something just because it's inconvenient." He looked around the room. "You want to learn courage? Start by listening. Really listening. To people who warn you, to things that don't sit right. To your own gut." His voice softened. "And if you ever find someone who has instincts like his, hold on to them." Bruno raised his head at his name, eyes bright, chest proud. The students erupted into applause again, louder, more honest, filled with something that sounded like awe. The principal returned to the mic. "Before we end, Mr. Harrington, the students wanted to give you something." A girl approached the stage holding a framed drawing. She walked carefully, almost ceremonially. Cole accepted it gently. It showed Bruno standing in the snow in front of a cracked fireplace stone. Behind him, sunlight cut through the trees. And there, in the corner, in neat handwriting, were 4 words: "He barked for truth." Cole swallowed, his throat unexpectedly tight. "Thank you," he said quietly. "This means more than you know." Bruno nudged his leg with a soft grunt, as if agreeing. After the auditorium emptied, one student stayed behind, hovering awkwardly by the stage steps. He was thin, anxious, fingernails bitten down to the skin. Cole approached. "You all right?" The boy nodded, then shook his head, then tried again. "I just wanted to ask." He looked at Bruno. Do you think dogs know when something bad is going to happen?" Cole crouched so they were eye level. "Sometimes they know before we do. Sometimes they're the only ones who do." The boy nodded slowly, eyes filling with something that wasn't quite sadness, not quite relief. "Thank you," he whispered, "for telling the truth." Cole placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. So did Bruno, lifting his paw gently and resting it there. The kid laughed in surprise, the sound bright and cracked open. Cole and Bruno walked out of the gym into the cool afternoon air. Snowflakes drifted from a washed-out sky. The wind carried the faint smell of pine, distant and clean. Bruno nudged Cole once, looking up with that steady, knowing gaze. "We did good today, buddy." Bruno wagged his tail, but just once. Deliberate. Proud. Cole looked back at the school. At the open doors, the bright chatter of kids spilling into hallways, the echo of truth spreading in small, important ways. Legacy wasn't about fame. It wasn't about interviews or medals. It was about a dog who refused to let a lie stay buried. And a town that finally chose to remember. One story at a time. The afternoon sun stretched long and golden over the clearing, the light catching on the new cabin's porch rails as if blessing what had been rebuilt. The air had that late autumn crispness, cool enough to wake the lungs, but warm enough to feel like the world hadn't quite let go of summer. Cole Harrington sat on the porch steps, a mug of coffee resting between his palms. Bruno lay beside him, chin on his paws, his coat touched with more grey than the year before. Age had softened the muscles in his shoulders and slowed his gait, but not his eyes. Those stayed sharp, watchful, the same eyes that had once locked onto a sealed slab of stone and warned Cole that a nightmare was waiting beneath it. A car crunched up the gravel path. Cole didn't stand. Bruno didn't either. They simply watched as a young reporter stepped out, awkward in his city shoes, notebook clutched under one arm, camera equipment slung across the other. "Mr. Harrington?" he asked, voice soft, like he wasn't sure whether he had entered someone's sacred space. Cole nodded. "You're the one from the Chronicle?" "Yes, sir. I appreciate you letting me visit. I wanted to get the story from you directly." Bruno rose slowly, stretching, joints stiff but movement still controlled. The reporter froze when he saw the dog's size, but Bruno merely walked over and sniffed the edge of his jacket before giving a single approving huff. "That's a good sign," Cole said. "Means you're all right." The reporter exhaled in relief and followed Cole to the porch steps. He opened his notebook, hesitating. "There's one question I've been told not to forget. Something everyone wants to know." Cole waited. "What made you believe the first night? That something in the cabin wasn't normal?" Bruno lifted his head at the word normal, as if offended. Cole leaned back, the wood warm behind his shoulders. The forest rustled in the distance. For a moment he said nothing. Then he looked down at the dog who had slept beside him in war zones, dragged him from burning walls, and led him toward a truth buried under 50 years of silence. "Because Bruno didn't bark for fear," Cole said quietly. "He barked for the truth." The reporter's pen froze mid-sentence. Cole continued. "Fear makes a dog noisy. But truth makes him certain." He nodded towards the trees. "He knew something was wrong before I even smelled smoke, before I even felt watched. He knew the land was hiding something that wanted to stay buried." Bruno shifted, leaning gently against Cole's leg. A soft breath left him, steady and confident, like a punctuation mark placed exactly where it belonged. The reporter swallowed. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't listened?" "Every day," Cole said. But then he smiled. "And every day I'm grateful I did." They talked for another hour, about Jonas Whitlow, about Northwood Extractives, about a sheriff who sold out his town, about a valley that finally told the truth. But what the reporter wrote down most carefully was everything about the dog sitting at Cole's side. When the last question was asked and the notebooks closed, Bruno walked the reporter back to his car, escorting him like he was returning a soldier to safety. The young man paused at the open door. "Mr. Harrington?" "Yes?" "People say Bruno's a hero. Do you agree?" Cole looked at the dog, greying muzzle, scar running along his flank, eyes bright against the fading light. "Hero is too small a word," he said. The reporter nodded, climbed into his car, and drove down the gravel road until the sound faded into the trees. Cole returned to the porch. Bruno settled beside him again, letting out a sigh that was half contentment, half old dog weariness. A breeze passed through, carrying the faint smell of pine sap and distant wood smoke. "You did good, buddy," Cole whispered. Bruno nudged his hand, demanding one more scratch behind the ear. Cole obliged. The valley around them was quiet. Not haunted, not cursed, just honest. Finally. The sun dipped behind the ridge. The first evening star blinked awake. Bruno shifted, ears twitching at some small noise in the woods. Not danger, just awareness. The old instinct never left him. Cole watched him, feeling that familiar swell of gratitude, heavy, warm, indescribable. It wasn't the cabin that changed everything. It wasn't the evidence. It wasn't the investigation that tore open a 50-year lie. It was a dog. A loyal, stubborn, battle-born dog who refused to let the truth die in a stone floor. Cole breathed in the cool air. "End of the road, Bruno." Bruno responded with a deep exhale, steady and sure, the same way he had breathed the night he saved Cole's life, the same way he had breathed the night he warned him about what lay beneath that fireplace, and maybe, just maybe, the same way he would breathe when another story waited to be found. "People think courage is loud," Cole murmured, "but sometimes it sounds like one bark in the middle of the night." Bruno thumped his tail once, agreement. Cole looked out at the forest one last time, then toward the camera this story was meant for, and asked, "What's your story with a loyal pet? Because someone out there has one. Someone out there lived it. And someone out there needs to tell it. For more stories like Bruno's, support our channel, German Shepherd. Share your story, join the community, and keep listening for the truth, wherever it decides to bark next.